The conversation started again the moment the lights went off. Not an argument, not a plan, just noise. The same loop, beginning exactly where it left off, as though the day had been nothing more than an interruption. Your brain is not broken. It is doing exactly what a threat detection system does in the dark, scanning, holding, reviewing with no information and no off switch in sight. What science found, after decades of studying minds that will not quiet, is that the loop does not respond to force. It never has. It responds to redirection. Welcome to Psychology for Sleep. You do not have to solve anything tonight to be here. The conversation in your head brought you to exactly the right place, and this hour is built for exactly that kind of mind. The restless one. The one that knows it should be sleeping and cannot stop knowing it. If a space that asks nothing of you sounds like what you need right now, subscribe and let this be the place you return to when the loop gets loud. Let's take one breath before we go any further. Breathe in slowly, and on the exhale, let the conversation drop one register. Just one. The noise does not have to disappear for sleep to arrive. It only has to lose its grip. You are already in the dark. You are already still. Something in the brain has been waiting for exactly this kind of quiet, waiting patiently, reliably, every night, and the science of what it does next begins now. That is where we are going, right now, into the stillness that was already here. The human brain does not have a built-in stop-thinking switch. Researchers have looked. No such circuit exists. No region whose activation simply halts cognition the way a power switch halts a machine. What the brain does have is something more interesting and more useful, a switching mechanism. A network capable of redirecting cognitive traffic from one channel to another. Tonight's question is not how to stop the mind. That question has no good answer. The question is how to change the channel. How do you silence the conversation in your head the moment you lie down? That is where the science begins. And that is what the next 100 facts are moving toward. When you are not focused on a task, when you stop working, stop reading, stop watching, the brain does not go quiet. It activates a resting state system, a network of regions that generates self-focused thought, narrative construction, social simulation, and planning. Neuroscientists call this the default mode network, and it turns on whenever the mind is not otherwise occupied. When you lie down at night and stop giving the brain a job to do, this network switches on. The monologue that begins in the dark is not random noise. It is the brain running its default program, the one it runs whenever it has nothing more important to do in the only uninterrupted hours available to it. Overthinking at bedtime has a clinical name: cognitive arousal. Cognitive arousal is not a personality trait or a character flaw. It is a measurable state with specific signatures. The body stays alert. Heart rate remains elevated. The brain's threat detection regions stay active, rather than beginning the gradual wind down that precedes sleep. The nervous system is treating the dark and the quiet as an ambiguous environment, one that has not yet been cleared as safe. This is a reasonable response in an uncertain world. It becomes a problem only when the ambiguity never resolves. And the system runs all night waiting for information that will not arrive. The brain evolved in environments where vigilance was survival. Unresolved problems were not abstract inconveniences, they were potential threats requiring active monitoring. An unexamined situation left overnight could become dangerous by morning. The bedtime monologue is not irrational. It is an ancient surveillance system, well designed for its original purpose, now running on a modern mind in a world with no predators nearby and no resolution available before morning. The system does not know this. It has no way of knowing this. It runs anyway, because running is what it was built to do. The time it takes to fall asleep after lying down, what researchers call sleep onset latency, is one of the most carefully measured variables in sleep science. One of its most reliable predictors is the level of pre-sleep cognitive arousal, how active, how looping, how narratively engaged the mind is in the minutes before sleep. People with high cognitive arousal at bedtime take much longer to reach even the lightest stages of sleep. The loop is not merely unpleasant. It has a measurable cost, a cost in minutes lost every single night. Minutes that accumulate across weeks and months into a deficit that shapes mood, memory, and health in ways that extend far beyond the bedroom. Sleep onset requires attention to narrow, fragment, and eventually dissolve. Wakefulness requires the opposite, broad, sustained attention held on something that matters. Overthinking keeps that window fully open, pointed at problems, just as the brain is trying to close it and let it go dark. The conversation at bedtime is not just unpleasant in the way any unpleasant experience is unpleasant. It is structurally at odds with the process of falling asleep. It actively holds open the very mechanisms that sleep onset requires to close. Luc Baudouin, a cognitive scientist at Simon Fraser University, spent years studying the gap between knowing you should be asleep and being able to get there. From that research, he developed a technique called cognitive shuffling, sometimes called serial diverse imagining. The idea is straightforward: replace the verbal, narrative content of the overthinking loop with a rapid sequence of unrelated, emotionally neutral visual images. The brain, receiving non-threatening and non-sequential imagery content that carries no instructions, no social stakes. No tomorrow reads this as safe and fragmented. It resembles the way the mind naturally feels just before sleep arrives on its own. That transitional zone between waking and sleep is called the hypnagogic state, and the technique is designed to accelerate entry into it. The overthinking loop is defined at its core by a kind of internal logic. One thought leads to the next, by meaning something is worried about, which connects to something that could go wrong, which connects to something that already went wrong, which connects to what someone else must be thinking. The chain is tight, narrative, and nearly impossible to interrupt from inside its own logic. Sleep onset thought has the opposite character. Images appear without causal connection, without narrative thread. A key that becomes a river, a sentence that shifts meaning halfway through, interrupting that logical chain. Removing the tissue that holds one thought to the next is one of the most reliable routes into the hypnagogic state, and from there, into sleep. The brain's threat detection system, the alarm that keeps the body alert in the presence of danger, is highly responsive to verbal content. Language carries meaning, and meaning carries emotional weight, and emotional weight activates alarm. A looping verbal monologue keeps this system on duty through the night. Visual imagery, particularly imagery that carries no narrative context, no personal significance, no connection to tomorrow's problems. Activates the alarm far less. When the brain is processing imagined images of a ship, an antelope, a puddle on a quiet street, rather than processing sentences about what might go wrong, the alarm has much less to work with. The image channel starves the alarm of the content it needs to stay active. Sleep onset is not a single moment, a clear boundary between awake and asleep. It is a cascade, a sequence of changes in which the brain's relay stations close. The body's temperature drops, and the brainstem shifts into a slower gear each step, making the next one more likely. This cascade has its own momentum once it begins. It tends to continue. But it requires a set of starting conditions: low arousal, low alertness, a nervous system that has received the signal that the environment is safe. Overthinking delays the cascade not by disrupting any single event, but by keeping those starting conditions: alertness, arousal, vigilance above the threshold where the cascade can begin. Running on chemical signals released by different regions, the brain's wake-up system keeps the body alert, scanning, and ready to respond. Each contributes its own version of a stay-awake message, keeping the system alert, scanning, and ready to respond. These wake-promoting chemicals directly oppose the ones that promote sleep. When one rises, the other falls. Sustained cognitive arousal, the active narrative loop running in the dark, keeps the wake-promoting side elevated, giving the sleep-promoting side no opening. The internal monologue is, in a direct chemical sense, sending a continuous message to the brain's sleep center: not yet. Wait. There is still something to resolve. People who experience frequent nighttime rumination tend to show stronger connections within the brain's narrative network, even during rest. The network that generates rumination is more tightly wired, more reflexively active, more practiced at finding its way back to the loop. This is a structural quality, not pathology. One that comes with genuine cognitive strengths that show up in waking life: heightened pattern recognition, strong narrative thinking, deep interpersonal sensitivity, the ability to hold complex problems in mind. These same capacities, applied to the dark and the quiet and the uncertainty of tomorrow, generate the midnight monologue. The strength and the vulnerability share the same source. Learning the entry point is straightforward. Choose a random word, something emotionally neutral, something with no personal significance: soap, fence, marble. Then begin generating a visual image for each letter of the word in sequence. Not a definition, not a memory, just an image. S, a ship on grey water. O, an orange resting on a white plate. A, an antelope standing in tall grass. P, a puddle on a paving stone. Rain rings, spreading outward and dissolving. The images should be brief and vivid, replaced quickly before the mind has time to build a story around any of them. This deliberate fragmentation of the narrative channel is the technique's central mechanism, giving the brain something to do that actively prevents the loop from reassembling. It works through a careful balance between too much and too little mental demand. Generating and rapidly replacing visual images requires just enough engagement to push the verbal rumination loop out of the foreground of awareness, but not so much that it raises arousal or keeps the planning system active. It occupies attention without activating the system that makes plans and solves problems. The balance is important. Too much demand, and you are more awake than before. Too little, and the loop drifts back in to fill the space. This technique is designed to sit in the narrow gap between them, present enough to crowd out the conversation, light enough to let drowsiness deepen around it. Pre-sleep cognitive arousal has two components that researchers have distinguished and studied separately. The first is somatic arousal, physical tension, elevated heart rate, body warmth. The second is cognitive arousal, racing thoughts, narrative loops, mental hyperactivity, the monologue that runs on its own of what the body is doing. Most sleep interventions, from relaxation exercises to breathing protocols to progressive muscle techniques, are designed to address the somatic component. They work well for people whose primary obstacle is physical tension. For people whose primary obstacle is the cognitive component, and there are many, physical relaxation reduces discomfort without quieting the channel. This technique was developed to reach what the body-based approaches cannot. Language and visual imagery are processed in different regions of the brain. They are not simply different formats of the same underlying process. Verbal thinking, the internal monologue, activates regions concentrated on the left side of the brain, the areas responsible for speech production, grammar, and the construction of meaning from words. Visual imagination activates a broader set of regions toward the back and on both sides, the areas responsible for processing what objects look like, where they are, how they move in space. Shifting from verbal rumination to visual imagery is not merely a change in mental content. It is a change in which parts of the brain are doing the work, a channel switch at the level of neural geography. There is a phenomenon sleep researchers have called the bedtime paradox. The harder a person tries to fall asleep, the more deliberately they direct effort toward the goal of sleeping, the more alert they tend to become. Sleep is unusual in this specific way. It is made worse by direct effort. Monitoring for sleep, checking whether drowsiness is arriving, assessing how long it is taking, wondering whether tonight will be another difficult night, requires sustained, judgmental attention. Sustained, judgmental attention is the opposite of the conditions required for sleep onset. The mind watching itself try to sleep is, in the act of watching, keeping itself awake. The image channel works in part because it gives attention somewhere harmless to go somewhere that is not the gap between here and asleep. Research into the relationship between worry and sleep onset has produced a finding that surprises many people. The subject of pre-sleep thought is a less reliable predictor of sleep difficulty than its structure. It is not necessarily what the thoughts are about that delays sleep. It is whether the thoughts are organized, self-referential, judgmental, and causally connected, whether they have the grammar of wakefulness rather than the grammar of sleep. Random. Non-self-referential imagery is at odds with the rumination loop, regardless of whether the images are pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. An imagined antelope on a foggy field is as effective as an imagined paradise beach, because effectiveness here is not about emotional valence. The shuffle is more important than what is being shuffled. The brain does not need pleasant content. It needs content that carries no instructions and has nowhere to go. The body maintains its own sleep pressure system, independent of whether the mind cooperates. A chemical byproduct of neural activity builds throughout every waking hour, rising steadily from the moment you wake. It creates an increasing drive towards sleep, substantial by evening, significant by the time you lie down. This drive cannot be argued with or dissolved by effort. It simply builds. By the time you are in bed, the sleepiness is biologically present. Overthinking does not eliminate this drive. It blocks the expression of it, holds the door that the pressure has been pushing against all day. The redirection is not about creating sleep from nothing. It is about stepping aside, opening the door, and letting the sleep that was already there finally arrive. Research on this technique, across multiple studies, shows that people trained in it report much shorter times to fall asleep compared to people using no technique, with improvements that appear after consistent practice over several weeks. The method requires nothing beyond a neutral word and a willingness to generate images. No equipment, no medication, no professional guidance required. It is learnable by most people who try it, repeatable every night, and effective across a wide range of ages and sleep environments. The barrier to entry is a single neutral word. Everything else, the images, the fragmentation, the drift towards sleep the brain provides on its own. There is a useful distinction between productive and unproductive pre-sleep thought, a distinction that appears across multiple lines of research on bedtime cognition. Productive pre-sleep thought is brief, forward-oriented, and closure-seeking, a quick list of tomorrow's tasks. A decision reached, something written down and handed off to paper. This type can be mildly linked to faster sleep onset, possibly because it satisfies the brain's completion drive rather than feeding the loop. Unproductive pre-sleep thought is circular, judgmental, and resolution-resistant, the replay of what went wrong, the rehearsal of a difficult conversation, the worst-case reading of an uncertain outcome. This type is linked to much longer sleep onset. The difference is whether the thought has somewhere to go. Rumination does not. It loops because there is no exit built into it. The channel switch is the exit that rumination cannot provide on its own. The brain's narrative engine, the network that constructs story, causality, and the continuous thread of selfhood runs at elevated capacity in people who ruminate at bedtime. This is the same engine that constructs dreams. It draws from the same sources: autobiographical memory, unresolved emotional material, social simulation, the reconstruction of events that did not go the way they should have. When this engine cannot rest, it turns its capacity inward and backward, generating narrative from the raw material of the day, cycling through scenarios with no director and no ending. Giving it random images to process is not a distraction. It is the closest available match for the content the brain naturally begins to generate when sleep is genuinely arriving on its own, and that match is close enough to matter. A therapeutic technique called imagery rescripting, used in treating trauma, nightmare disorder, and anxiety, works on a closely related principle. It involves deliberately replacing distressing mental imagery with neutral or reconstructed alternatives, guiding the brain away from the images that sustain distress. The literature on imagery-based interventions finds something important. The brain responds to self-generated visual imagery with real physical change. Heart rate, skin conductance, and stress hormones shift in response to imagined content, much as they would shift in response to real content, the brain does not fully distinguish between what it sees and what it vividly imagines. This is why the shuffled imagery works. It is not neutral because the brain ignores it. It is neutral because the brain processes it and finds nothing to alarm. The generation effect is a well-established finding in cognitive psychology. Self-generated information content the mind produces rather than passively receives is encoded more durably and held more vividly than information delivered from outside. This technique uses that effect in a deliberate way. By generating the images actively by being the author of the ship, the antelope, the rain puddle, the practitioner shifts from audience to author. The mind that was receiving the monologue and being shaped by it becomes the mind producing something else. Authorship changes the relationship. The conversation loses its grip not because it was overpowered, but because something else was being written at the same time, and the writing, over time, crowded out the reading. The mind that cannot sleep is not a malfunctioning mind, not a weak mind, not a mind that has failed at something basic. It is a mind doing what it was built to do, monitoring, constructing, protecting, anticipating in a context where those functions have no useful outlet and no available resolution. The question was never whether to stop this brain from working. That question has no satisfying answer. The question was always how to give it a different assignment, something harmless, something fragmentary, something that carries no instructions and leads nowhere in particular, something that does not feed the conversation. The next layer of facts goes into the structure of the loop itself, how it is assembled, and exactly where the image channel interrupts it. The thread running through all of that is not about discipline or effort or trying harder at sleep. The person lying awake at midnight is not failing. They have a remarkably capable threat assessment system, one designed for a more dangerous world with no appropriate target tonight. So it finds targets everywhere it can. Worth sitting with the same architecture that makes a mind restless at 2 a.m. makes it unusually perceptive, unusually empathetic, unusually capable in waking life. The sensitivity is not the problem. The channel is. Feel where that lands in your body, the particular quality of being understood rather than corrected. The next layer goes into the structure of the loop itself, not just the fact of it, but how it is assembled, thought by thought. Because once the structure is visible, the image channel makes a different kind of sense. The overthinking loop is not random. It has a grammar, a set of predictable structures that recur across different people, different nights, different topics. If-then conditionals. If this happens, then that will follow. Worst-case extrapolation. Follow the thread of possible outcomes until it reaches the worst one, and stay there. Social assessment sequences. Reconstruct what was said. Infer what was meant. Anticipate what will be thought. Replay loops. Return to the moment something went wrong, and run it again. These are not random thoughts generated freshly each night. They are templates, reusable structures the brain fills in automatically, using the day's raw material. Whenever arousal and uncertainty are both elevated, recognizing this does not silence the templates, but it changes the relationship to them. A template is a form, not a verdict. Machinery, not meaning. The brain's alarm system does not respond to probability. It responds to vividness. A worst-case scenario imagined in high resolution with sensory detail. Social consequence and emotional texture activates the alarm almost as strongly as an equivalent real threat would. This is the architecture of the bedtime anxiety loop. The mind generates vivid future scenarios. The alarm responds to the vividness as though the scenario were real. Arousal increases. More vivid content arrives in response. The loop amplifies itself with every cycle. The intensity of the loop is not proportional to the likelihood of what it imagines. It is proportional to the detail with which it imagines it. This is why reassurance, reminding yourself that the feared thing is unlikely, rarely works at midnight. The alarm is not evaluating probability. The antidote is not a more convincing counterargument. It is dilution replacing vivid, threatening imagery with vivid, harmless imagery until the alarm has nothing substantial left to respond to. Here is something worth noticing right now. The body has almost certainly softened slightly since lying down. Not because anything has been resolved, not because the loop has stopped, but because sustained listening, even to information about the brain, carries a different physical signature than sustained self-referential rumination. The shoulders hold slightly less. The jaw loosens slightly. The breath has changed rhythm without being asked to. This is not a small thing. It is the nervous system responding to content that does not require a response to information that makes no demands, assigns no urgency, and creates no gap between where you are and where you need to be. That shift is already happening. It was happening before this sentence. Researchers have found a useful distinction between two kinds of pre-sleep thought, the kind that keeps you awake and the kind that lets sleep arrive. Thoughts that keep you awake are characterized by self-reference, futurity, and problem framing, the kind of thinking that maintains alertness and engagement. Thoughts that let sleep arrive are characterized by present moment drift, diffuse body awareness, and loose observation, the kind that permits and eventually produces sleep. The shift from wakefulness to sleep onset is, in meaningful part, a shift from one mode to the other. It is not a shift in how much you are thinking. It is a shift in the quality of attention brought to thought. The image channel induces this shift deliberately, substituting sleep-compatible content for sleep at odds with content at exactly the moment it is needed. As sleep approaches, the brain undergoes a progressive loosening of deliberate, effortful thinking, the goal-directed regulation that characterizes wakefulness. The planning system winds down. The self-monitoring system reduces its output. The judgmental functions that keep thinking organized and purposeful begin to withdraw. This loosening allows the more fluid, associative processing of sleep to emerge. Overthinking resists this loosening. The internal monologue is the effortful system, refusing to release, still insisting, at some level, that there is something important left to evaluate before the brain is permitted to let go. The image channel gives the effortful system just enough to do that it stops insisting and in stopping, allows the loosening to proceed. People who sleep on a difficult problem working on it, sleeping, returning to it the next day, solve it differently than people who work on it without sleeping. During sleep, the brain replays and re-indexes the day's experiences, forming connections between items. the waking mind, with its preference for linear logic, would not have linked. Solutions arrive in the morning that were not available the night before, not because effort was applied during sleep, but because the sleeping brain operates with a different ordering logic. The monologue that prevents sleep is, among other things, preventing access to this processing. Continuing to think about an unresolved problem at midnight is probably the least efficient response to that problem available. Sleep is the better problem solver. Beyond attention displacement, the technique has a secondary mechanism that operates alongside the primary one of attention displacement. It provides the brain with a sense of completion, the felt experience of having occupied the attentional foreground sufficiently that it can now be released. The brain tends to complete tasks before disengaging, which is why unfinished business intrudes on awareness more than finished business. Shuffling provides just enough of a task image generation. Image replacement. The small, ongoing work of visual construction to satisfy this drive. Once satisfied, the drive releases. The brain, having done something, is willing to stop. The images themselves are not the point. The act of authoring them and completing that authoring is. Mindfulness-based approaches applied to sleep difficulties work through a related but distinct mechanism. Rather than giving the mind a new task, they invite a shift in the relationship to the existing task. Attention moves from the content of thoughts to the process of thinking, from what the thoughts are saying to the fact that thoughts are occurring. The practitioner watches the loop arrive and pass without stepping inside it. This shift reduces the judgmental loading of the monologue. It does not silence the thoughts. It changes what the thoughts mean, or rather, it reduces the automatic assumption that the thoughts mean anything requiring immediate action. The conversation continues, but there is no longer anyone inside it arguing back. And without the argument, the loop gradually loses the energy that was sustaining it. Sleep plays a critical and specific role in the processing of emotionally significant experiences from the preceding day. During the deeper stages of sleep, distressing memories are re-encountered, brain-basedly replayed and processed, but this time without the original stress response that accompanied their first encoding. The emotional charge associated with the memory is gradually reduced. The experience is refiled with more space around it, less urgency attached to it. Over time and across many sleep cycles, this process meaningfully reduces the grip that difficult experiences maintain on waking thought. Overthinking at bedtime delays this processing. The items being worried about in the dark are items the sleeping brain could have processed more effectively, but only if sleep was permitted to arrive. In the 1920s, a psychologist named Bluma Zyganek documented a finding that has since been replicated many times. The mind remembers incomplete tasks more persistently and experiences them as more cognitively intrusive than tasks that have been finished. The bedtime conversation is often composed almost entirely of these triggers, exchanges that did not reach conclusion. Decisions left hanging. Things begun and not completed. Each one maintains an open file in working memory, pulling at attention, resisting the closure that would allow it to recede. The image channel works partly by interrupting the rehearsal of these open files long enough for the sleep onset process to make their rehearsal irrelevant. The channel switches, and in the new channel populated by a ship, an antelope, A puddle in the shape of a letter, there are no open files. There is nothing to complete except the image itself. And the image is already done. There is a documented phenomenon called sleep state misperception, sometimes described as paradoxical insomnia, in which a person experiences being awake while brain measurements show they are in light sleep. People who believe they have lain awake for hours are sometimes found, by brain measurement, to have been sleeping intermittently throughout that same period. This matters because it reveals something important. The conversation continues into light sleep. The monologue does not stop at the boundary between waking and sleeping. It persists into the earliest sleep stages, generating the impression of wakefulness, even when the brain has technically crossed over. The threshold is quieter, and often earlier, than it feels from inside. The loop runs past the boundary without knowing it has been crossed. Anxiety and insomnia are linked in a two-directional way that creates a durable feedback loop. Anxiety makes falling asleep difficult. Difficulty falling asleep increases anxiety, both the immediate anxiety of lying awake and the anticipatory anxiety that begins to build around bedtime itself. Over repeated nights, the bed builds associations. It becomes connected, associated not only with sleep, but with the experience of not sleeping, with the frustration of the loop, with the particular quality of late-night alertness. These associations become conditioned, triggered automatically at bedtime, before any thought has even begun. Breaking this conditioning requires consistency, not a single successful night, but a pattern of new associations, built one night at a time, gradually outweighing the old ones. People who write down their concerns before bed, then physically close the notebook and set it aside, show measurably faster sleep onset than people who process the same concerns mentally while lying in bed. Writing moves outside the content. It moves the items from active working memory into a record that exists outside the mind. Closing the notebook signals, in a way the nervous system can register, that the items have been held, not resolved, but managed. Placed somewhere that will still be there tomorrow. Resolution is not required before the brain can release attention from a problem. It requires only the credible sense that the problem is being held somewhere other than active attention. The closed notebook is that somewhere. So, in a different but related way, is a completed shuffle. Core body temperature follows a rhythm closely coupled to sleep onset. In the hour or two before sleep, core temperature begins to drop, a drop that triggers a cascade of downstream effects, including the release of sleep-promoting hormones and the support of the first sleep stages. Sustained cognitive arousal, by maintaining sympathetic nervous system activity, interferes with this temperature drop. The internal conversation keeps the body slightly warmer than it needs to be for the cascade to begin cleanly. The shift toward sleep is partly a thermal shift, the body cooling itself into a state the brain can use. The mind's reluctance to quiet is also, in a literal physical sense, the body's inability to cool. The stillness of the mind and the coolness of the body are not metaphors for each other. They are the same system, speaking in two different languages. Research on sleep, distributed across multiple shorter windows rather than one overnight block, demonstrates something useful about sleep itself. It is not a single fragile event that must occur in one precisely timed block, or be lost entirely. The human brain is prepared to enter sleep repeatedly across any given period, given the right conditions. It is a recurring state, not a one-time opportunity. This reframing matters not because fragmented sleep is recommended. The evidence does not support fragmenting sleep deliberately, but because it removes a source of the very arousal that prevents sleep. The belief that a perfect window is closing, that missing sleep onset now means losing the whole night, generates exactly the kind of urgency that holds the lever. The brain's readiness to sleep does not expire. It waits. There is a phase of this technique that practitioners learn to recognize as a reliable signal that sleep onset is approaching the imagery development phase. This is when the generated images begin taking on a life of their own. The ship starts moving without being asked to. The antelope acquires an unlikely color. The puddle develops reflections it would not have in real life. The images become spontaneously embellished. The practitioner begins to lose track of the original word, or finds that images are arriving before the letter is even chosen. This development is the brain's dream generation machinery coming online, the same mechanism that produces dreams beginning to operate on the content being provided. When the images start telling their own story, the technique has done its work. The brain has found the channel it was being guided toward. What follows tends to follow quickly. A part of the brain's monitoring architecture is dedicated to tracking the gap between current state and desired state, registering discrepancies and maintaining that flagging until the gap is closed. At midnight, for the person who wants to be asleep and is not, this system registers a significant gap. Trying harder to close the gap generates additional activity in the systems, registering the gap, keeping the gap present, sustaining the alert. The harder the mind presses towards sleep, the more clearly the systems that are not yet asleep register that they are not yet asleep. Trying harder to sleep is processed by the brain as evidence of the problem, which generates more arousal, which widens the gap further. The loop feeds itself through the act of fighting it. There is preliminary research suggesting that techniques like the image channel may reduce this gap monitoring by removing the judgmental comparison between current state and desired state from the foreground of attention. When attention is fully occupied with imagining a soap dish, a marble staircase, a fox crossing a field at an angle, the monitoring system cannot locate the gap it was tracking. The gap does not close, but attention stops checking for it. For the purposes of sleep onset, this is enough. The gap does not need to be resolved. It needs only to become irrelevant for long enough that the biological processes of sleep can begin. Once begun, they tend to continue. This technique is not a cure for the loop. It is a way of making the loop temporarily irrelevant, which turns out to be enough. A writer once described the capacity to remain in uncertainty without restlessly reaching after fact or reason, to let things be unresolved without treating being unresolved as an emergency. Sleep requires something that closely resembles this capacity. The ability to allow the mind to be where it is in the dark, not yet asleep, without demanding that it immediately resolve into something more comfortable. The monologue at midnight is the opposite of that capacity. It is the reaching for answers, for reassurance, for the certainty that tomorrow will be manageable. Sleep begins in the letting go of that reach, not by forcing the reach to stop, but by offering the reaching hand something else to hold, something neutral, something fragmentary, something that the alarm cannot use. The honest answer the science supports is not what most people expect. How do you silence the conversation in your head? The moment you lie down, you do not silence it. You redirect it. You change the channel not because the thoughts are wrong or the fears are unreal, but because the channel the conversation runs on is at odds with sleep. And there is a different channel available. A channel without threat, without instructions, without the grammar of tomorrow. The second half of tonight moves into what the brain does when the channel finally switches and what the threshold actually feels like from inside. The thread running through all of that is a single observation: the overthinking mind is not an enemy. It is a capable system, capable of applying itself to a situation it was never designed to navigate. Darkness, stillness, uncertainty, no available action, no resolution before morning. What is worth noticing right now is whether the body has arrived somewhere slightly different than where it began. The listening has been doing something. Not because it resolved anything, but because it gave the brain something other than itself to attend to. And the brain, given that gift, used it. Let that understanding settle wherever in your body it finds space. What comes next begins with something the research finds counterintuitive: the role that acceptance, not effort, not technique, not trying harder, plays in the moment sleep finally arrives. There is a moment it happens reliably. If you look for it, when a thought you have had 100 times arrives and feels, for the first time, slightly smaller than it used to, not less true, perhaps, just less heavy, less urgent, less like a verdict. Acceptance-based therapeutic approaches have a name for this shift. They call it diffusion, the loosening of the bond between a thought and the absolute authority that thought has been carrying. The practitioner learns to observe a thought rather than inhabit it. Something watches the thought arrive without stepping inside it. And in that watching, the thought loses weight, not credibility. Exactly, but weight. The difference between carrying a verdict and observing a weather pattern. Paradoxical intention is one of the more counterintuitive techniques in the sleep therapy literature, and one of the better supported ones. The instruction is: lie in bed and try to stay awake. Do not resist sleep, but do not pursue it either. Simply attempt to maintain wakefulness with as little effort as that requires. In studies, people given this instruction fall asleep faster than people given the instruction to sleep normally. Sleep, no longer being evaluated for its promptness or adequacy, enters the space that the monitoring has vacated. No longer being resisted, the loop loses the fuel that resistance was providing. The conversation, no longer being silenced, gradually runs out of the urgency that the silencing attempt was providing. Resistance was not merely an accompaniment to the loop, it was part of what the loop was running on. Between alert engagement and restorative recovery, the nervous system shifts in a rhythm as old as human physiology itself. The alert state scans, evaluates, and maintains readiness. The restorative state allows repair, filing, and renewal. Sleep requires, the restorative state requires. More precisely, that the transition into it has been completed with some stability. The looping conversation maintains the alert state by providing a continuous stream of content that the system reads as requiring assessment and potential response. Removing that content through the image channel, through acceptance, through the breath creates the conditions the body has been ready for since long before the lights went off. The body knows how to do this. It has been doing it every night of your life. Running from the brainstem, through the chest and into the abdomen, the vagus nerve, connecting the brain to the heart, lungs, and gut is the primary anatomical pathway of the body's restorative system. Slow, extended exhalation activates this pathway directly. It signals the heart to slow, reduces circulating stress hormones, and shifts the nervous system toward the restorative mode. An exhale that is longer than the inhale is not a relaxation technique in the way a hot bath is a relaxation technique. It is a direct physical lever accessible at any moment, requiring no preparation and no particular skill. It works whether or not the mind is cooperating. The breath communicates to the nervous system at a level below thought. Systematically tensing and then releasing specific muscle groups, a practice widely used in clinical settings for sleep and anxiety, reduces physical tension and, through the coupling of body and brain, indirectly reduces mental tension as well. The body's tension system and the emotional system share infrastructure. Sustained muscle tension sends signals that the alarm reads as evidence that something threatening is happening. Releasing that tension removes those signals. The alarm, receiving fewer threat-consistent signals from the body, updates its reading. The conversation, losing one of its sources of confirming evidence, runs with slightly less certainty. The body is not separate from the loop. It is part of it, and changing the body changes the loop. Between fully awake and genuinely asleep lies a transition zone, a region between fully awake and genuinely asleep that many people who experience nighttime rumination pass through without recognizing they have entered it. Thoughts at this stage are fragmented and non-linear image-like, loosely associative, governed by a logic that does not hold together under examination. If you have ever followed a thought that suddenly made no sense, and noticed that it made no sense, and found that the noticing felt distant and unhurried, that was the transition zone, you were further along than you knew. The crossing had already begun. The sudden muscle twitch that sometimes startles a person at the edge of sleep has a name, the hypnic jerk. Researchers believe it may be a relic of a time when sleeping in trees meant that muscle relaxation carried real physical risk. As the body begins to release into sleep, the brain, sensing the relaxation, fires a brief alarm. The twitch is not a sign of dysfunction. It is not evidence that something brain-based is wrong. It is the body practicing the leap into sleep and occasionally startling itself on the way down. It resolves on its own. The next approach to sleep tends to go more smoothly. Sleep cycles through different stages throughout the night. The most vivid, most emotionally engaged dreaming tends to occur in cycles that grow longer as the night progresses in the final hours before waking. This is also when the most significant emotional memory processing occurs, when the events of the previous day are replayed, re-encountered, and refiled. When early sleep cycles are missed because cognitive arousal delayed sleep onset by an hour or two, this processing is compressed into fewer, shorter windows. The conversation at midnight has costs that extend into the following day and into the sleep quality of the night that follows that one. Sleep deprivation does not produce only fatigue. Brain imaging finds that people who have not slept enough show far greater reactivity to unpleasant stimuli, the alarm, responding more intensely to the same input. For the person who loses sleep over anxiety, this is directly consequential the following night. The emotional brain is more reactive. The alarm responds more quickly. The loop activates more readily. Each night of insufficient sleep makes the next night harder. But the reverse is also true. Each night of adequate sleep reduces that reactivity, dampens the alarm, and makes the next night slightly more manageable. The architecture of the loop is precise and self-strengthening, but it runs in both directions. The image channel, practiced consistently, begins to rebuild the architecture from the other end. During sleep, the brain replays the day's experiences in compressed, accelerated form, sometimes many times faster than the original events. This replay is not random, it targets emotionally significant experiences, recently encoded memories, and material that was left unresolved during the waking day. Sleep is the brain's editorial desk, the place where raw experience is processed, contextualized, and filed in a form that is more manageable than how it arrived. What feels charged and urgent and too large to hold at midnight often feels, by morning, like something the mind has already begun to digest. That digestion happened during sleep, not during the worrying. The worrying delayed access to the desk. Sleep is where the actual work occurs. A surge in alerting chemistry that can occur late at night when the body is kept awake past its natural sleep window can extend wakefulness by several hours before the next favorable window opens. The body's internal clock and its built-up sleep pressure work together to create periods when the biological conditions for sleep onset are most favorable. Staying awake past one of these windows means the next opportunity may be hours away. Working with the body's timing, applying the image channel when sleep pressure is naturally highest is the gentler path into sleep. Research on creative problem-solving has found, across multiple experimental designs, that insight, the sudden resolution of a problem that has resisted direct effort, occurs much more often following sleep than following an equivalent period of waking rest. The sleeping brain reorganizes information differently than the waking. Analytically focused brain, it makes connections that linear, sequential thinking would not pursue, and approaches the same problem from a arrangement that was not available while awake. The monologue at bedtime, turning problems over in the same familiar arrangement, approaching them from the same angles repeatedly, is probably the least efficient response to those problems available. Sleep is the better problem solver. The conversation that insists on staying awake to find the answer is standing between the mind and the process most likely to find it. Waking from deep sleep often brings a brief, heavy grogginess, sometimes called sleep inertia, where thinking is slower and the pull back towards sleep is strong. It is more pronounced when the waking is abrupt or the preceding sleep was unusually deep. Someone who finally falls asleep after a long delay sometimes enters deeper sleep than usual, the brain compensating for the late start, and wakes more groggy than the previous night would suggest. Not a failure of sleep, this is the brain's compensatory architecture doing what it was designed to do. The grogginess resolves within minutes. The night, despite its difficult start, accomplished what it needed to. For people who find self-generating imagery too demanding, a mobile application does the prompting, sending random words and image cues to receive passively. For some minds, actively generating random imagery requires enough effort to raise alertness rather than lower it, particularly early on. before the process has become automatic. Having an external source supply the words and prompts, receiving them passively rather than generating them actively, can reduce this demand while preserving the core mechanism. The channel switch still occurs. The authorship is lighter. Both routes lead to the same place. The sleep-promoting effect of narrative audio, spoken word content, stories, educational material. The human voice, describing things at a measured pace, operates through a related mechanism. A story provides just enough structure to occupy the foreground of attention, preventing the mind from filling the quiet with the loop. But it is low stakes, it makes no demands, assigns no urgency, and creates no gap between current state and desired state. The story does what the monologue cannot do for itself. It provides direction without pressure, narrative without self-reference, engagement without the kind of arousal that sustains wakefulness. The mind, given someone else's story to loosely follow, stops generating its own. The channel is occupied. The conversation finds no opening. A practice called pre-sleep incubation involves briefly reviewing an unresolved problem before sleep, not to solve it, but simply to acknowledge it exists and then releasing it with a stated intention of returning in the morning. People who practice this report higher rates of overnight insight than those who either work on the problem before sleep or ignore it. The release needs to be deliberate and specific, not vague. A clear internal statement: I know about this. I will return to it. It does not need me right now. In this particular moment, I am done. The brain does not require the problem to be solved before it can release attention from it. It requires only a credible signal that the problem is being held somewhere safe until morning. During rumination, the body monitoring network, the system that tracks internal physical state and reports it to awareness, shows heightened activity. The ruminative mind regularly checks the body for confirming evidence. A tight chest becomes confirmation that the worry is justified. An elevated heart rate becomes evidence that the feared outcome is approaching. These internal signals feed the loop as surely as the thoughts do, providing a continuous stream of somatic evidence for the narrative the monologue is constructing, redirecting that monitoring from threat scanning to simple noticing, observing sensations as sensations. Without assigning them narrative, meaning removes the body's contribution to the loop. The body stops being evidence. It becomes, instead, somewhere to rest attention without agenda. Directing attention sequentially through different regions of the body, observing whatever sensations are present without evaluating them, is one of the most reliable sleep onset practices in the mindfulness literature. It works by occupying the body monitoring channel that rumination uses to gather confirming evidence, but with an observational quality of attention that carries no judgmental agenda. The channel is the same. One quality of attention maintains the loop. Another gives it nothing to hold. It observes without interpreting, notices without concluding. One mode of body monitoring maintains the loop. The other gives it nothing to hold. Research on self-distancing, describing one's own experience from a slight remove, as though observing a third person rather than inhabiting the experience directly, finds it measurably reduces emotional reactivity compared to first-person narration of the same events. Describing the experience in the third person, she is lying in the dark. She notices her mind is active. She is not required to respond to it, creates a useful gap. rather than inhabiting the experience directly. The mind observes it. That observing activates regulatory pathways in the brain that reduce the alarm response to the content being described. The distance is small. The mind does not move far from itself. But the small movement is sufficient to change the relationship between the observer and the content, turning something happening to you into something happening to a character, with you as the one who notices. Emotional regulation across the waking day is one of the strongest predictors of sleep quality that night, more reliable, in many studies, than sleep environment or the presence or absence of stress. How the day's events were processed, how much tension remains active, how many experiences were deferred rather than metabolized. All of it arrives at bedtime as built-up load. The bedtime conversation is often the day's emotional ledger, demanding to be balanced in the only uninterrupted hours available. This means the best preparation for tonight's sleep is not only what happens in the bedroom, it is also what happened in the hours before, and how present, how complete, how fully engaged those hours were. Like most skills, the image channel improves with practice. The first time it is tried, generating random images without falling back into verbal thought can require real effort. The mind is unfamiliar with the channel and finds it hard to stay in. Over subsequent nights, as the process becomes more automatic, less effort is needed to locate the channel and stay in it. The technique is a skill one that develops through the same principles as other skills, through repetition, through the gradual automation of what was initially effortful, through the brain's capacity to make familiar what was once difficult. The first night is the hardest. The channel becomes more accessible with every use. Imagined social scenarios are processed by the brain with a fidelity that surprises researchers who study it. Replaying an argument in the mind activates many of the same neural circuits as the argument itself. The regions involved in emotional processing fire just as they fired in response to the real event. A feared future conversation produces measurable anticipatory stress responses, elevated heart rate, increased muscle tension, altered breathing patterns. The bedtime conversation is mostly social in content: what was said, what it meant, what should have been said, what will be said tomorrow. These are not lightweight abstract thoughts. They are full simulations consuming real biological resources as demanding on the system, in their way, as the actual events they are rehearsing. The mind that will not rest is not a mind that has failed to understand the importance of sleep. It understands. The problem is not knowledge, not will, not the absence of effort. It is a profoundly capable system doing its most important work, maintaining vigilance, processing social reality, preparing for what comes next in the only uninterrupted hours it has been given. What has been building across all of tonight, from every angle and through every mechanism, is a single proposition. You cannot force this mind to stop. Force is the wrong tool. You can only offer it a different assignment, something that costs the brain nothing, something that carries no instructions, something that does not require the loop to continue. The image of a marble, the image of a fence, the image of a ship on a quiet, letter-shaped sea. So much careful, patient attention to a mind that will not let go, and the mind that has been listening has probably let go, at least a little, without noticing it happen. That is worth pausing with. The listening itself has been a kind of channel switch. The facts displaced the conversation not by overpowering it, but by occupying the same bandwidth with something that carried no instructions and made no demands. There is something in that worth carrying beyond tonight. Feel where your body has arrived, the weight of your head against whatever it is resting on, the particular quality of the dark in this room, at this hour. What comes next is about what the brain does when the lever is finally released, what the crossing actually feels like from inside the mind that is finally allowed to make it. The numbers fall away here. What follows is what the science says about the threshold. Given permission, the brain enters the transition. Images begin to arrive without being summoned. A sound that has no source. A color that belongs to no particular object. A face that belongs to no one you have ever met, and yet carries the unmistakable quality of familiarity. The language network, which has been active and generating and insisting all evening, begins to quiet. Not all at once. In the way a room quiets when the last conversation in it winds down gradually. Then more so. The judgmental regions follow. The part of the brain that has been assigning meaning, tracking gaps, registering discrepancies between where you are and where you should be, it too begins to withdraw its investment. And then the sentinel, the one that has been scanning all night for something that never came. The body's temperature has dropped another fraction of a degree since the last time you noticed it, if you noticed it at all. Sleep pressure has been building since the moment you woke this morning. It has been accumulating through every hour of the day, pressing steadily, without urgency, against the door. Opening now. The door. Finding no threat in the shuffle of images. The brain's alarm finding nothing in the foreground of attention that requires assessment reduces its output. The wake-promoting signals receive less stimulation. The sleep-promoting cells, having waited with the patient reliability of a biological system that has never once failed to eventually get its way, begin to fire more steadily. Slowly, the sensory relay gates, the structures that regulate what reaches conscious awareness, begin to close. The room does not get quieter. The brain simply reduces its investment in monitoring the room. Somewhere in the cortex, the first slow oscillation begins. A wave, long and low, surfacing like something that was always there beneath the faster activity of wakefulness. It spreads, not all at once. In the way, warmth spreads through a space that has been cold first here, then adjacent, then through. The thoughts that remain are getting stranger, less grammatical, less coherent, less obviously yours. A fence that is also somehow a conversation you had years ago, in a different city, that you had not thought of since. A marble that rolls without physics, in a direction that makes sense inside the dream logic that is beginning to replace waking logic. A word that means something entirely different from what it means when you are awake. And the different meaning feels, inexplicably, more correct. Losing its architecture now, the narrative, the causal connective tissue between one thought and the next is dissolving. And that dissolution, which would be alarming if you were fully awake to notice it, is, from where you are now, simply what is happening, simply the texture of this particular moment. Withdrawing now, the effortful brain, The memory system is beginning its first quiet replay of the day, compressing the hours, accelerating through the events, filing things with the particular ordering logic of sleep that the waking mind cannot replicate and could not have predicted. Somewhere in that replay, the things that felt unresolved when you lay down are being held differently, not solved, not dismissed, re-encountered without the original stress response, filed with more space around them, less urgency attached. The process is already happening, without your involvement, without your direction. You do not need to supervise it. Sleep is more capable of this work than the monologue ever was. The breath has slowed without being asked to. It found its own pace sometime in the last half hour and settled there. The chest rises and falls with less urgency than it had an hour ago, less than it had 20 minutes ago. The rhythm has become something you could follow without effort, and then something you could stop following and it would continue on its own. The muscles that were holding something in the jaw, in the place between the shoulders, along the backs of the hands are releasing it. Slowly, in the way that held things release when they are no longer needed, not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually and without requiring attention. No instruction is needed. The body already knows how to do this. It needs only the mind to stop sending signals that say not yet. Wait. There is still something to resolve. And the mind, given images of ships and antelopes and rain puddles, an assignment requiring just enough authorship to displace the conversation, and no more has stopped sending those signals. The images are yours. You made them. They belong to no threat. They carry no instructions about tomorrow. They are not evidence of anything. They are simply what was being imagined, in a mind that was finally given something harmless to imagine. They are just there, like objects in a room that has grown very quiet, like the conversation that was present an hour ago and has, without announcement, without resolution, simply moved on. Quiet now. The room. The body carries the weight of built-up hours, the pleasant, specific heaviness of a body that has been doing its job all day and is now, finally, being allowed to rest. Somewhere behind the images, the dark deepens. Not threatening, just deeper. In the way dark deepens in the middle of a night that is going well, that has been going well for longer than you have been paying attention. No following needed. The breath knows what to do. Further away now, the images, or you are getting further from them. It is hard to determine which is moving. That difficulty, that specific inability to locate the boundary between the observer and what is being observed is the moment. That is what it feels like from inside. The mind that could not stop has stopped. Not because it was forced to, not because it was argued out of its position or convinced of anything, because it was given somewhere harmless to go, because the assignment was specific enough to occupy it and light enough to let it drift, because the channel was there all along, waiting to be found. And in the space that opened when the conversation let go as quietly as these things always happen when they finally happen, sleep arrived. The way it always does, without announcement, when the brain, at last, stopped watching for it. The mind you brought to this hour, the one that picked up the thread the moment the lights went off, that found its way back to the loop through every gap, was not the enemy. It was doing what it was built to do, in a context that none of its design anticipated. It constructed a conversation from the raw material available to it: unresolved days, uncertain tomorrows, the social ledger that never quite balances, the plans that need revisiting. It was not malfunctioning. It was applying its full capacity to a problem that was not addressable in the dark, in the silence, with no action available. It was doing its job in the only way it knew how. What tonight offered was not silence. Silence was never the answer. The loop does not respond to silence. Silence is just an empty channel that the loop fills. What tonight offered was a different channel, something specific enough to occupy the foreground of attention, harmless enough to carry no alarm, fragmentary enough to prevent the reassembly of the conversation. Not a cure, not a performance, just a small, learnable, repeatable act of redirection. Sleep lab data, clinical trials, brain imaging studies of minds in the act of crossing over all arrive at the same conclusion. The loop does not need to be defeated. It does not need to be silenced or corrected or overcome. It needs to be given a door. Somewhere to exit that is not back into itself. Somewhere that leads somewhere other than another loop. You gave it a door tonight. And the brain patient, flexible, endlessly practical, designed by its long history to find the most efficient path through, used it. Whatever was unresolved when you lay down is still unresolved. It will be there tomorrow. But tomorrow it will be held by a brain that slept, and a brain that slept holds things differently than a brain that spent the night in conversation with itself. Tomorrow's version of those problems belongs to tomorrow's version of that brain. The work of this particular night is done. What the brain does with it now belongs to sleep. Return to this when the loop comes back, and it will come back. Because that is what minds like this do. The difference is that the image channel is now slightly more familiar, slightly easier to find, a little quicker to trust. The overthinking and anxiety playlist holds more of tonight for when you need it. It will be there. The conversation is already quieter than it was an hour ago. Not because you stopped it, because you stopped arguing with the system running it. Let your shoulders release the last of what they were carrying tonight. Sleep carries you to where the scan finally ends, where the brain receives the signal it was waiting for all along, and stands down. If your eyes have already closed, there is nothing to open them for. Rest well, quiet one. Where the mind finally stops reaching, sleep begins. Good night.